hello everyone. Thank you very much for joining this webinar today. I'm really happy to see some familiar faces or names in the audience. And I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to speak to you today about regulatory aspects that need to be considered at a very early stage during a product development. And as probably you all have experienced, it is extremely important to get your regulatory strategy right from the very start in order to avoid unnecessary delays and save costs and time to market. So I will be speaking specifically about feed additive registrations in the EU. And then if you're interested in learning more about the subject, or if you're also interested in the regulatory strategy applicable to veterinary products, not only in the EU, but also in the US, there will be an opportunity for you to meet our experts at an event on animal health, nutrition, and innovation that is taking place in London in March. And I will share the details of this at the end of the presentation. So first, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Laura Payo. I'm a biotechnologist by training, and I have been working in regulatory affairs and specializing in animal nutrition for over 11 years at Tech Consulting, which is now part of the Argenta Group. So the duration of this presentation will be around 30 minutes. At the end of the presentation, we will have 10 minutes for questions. And you will be able to either use the chat function or raise your hand if you would like to speak and ask a question. But then it would be great if everyone can just keep their microphone muted in the meantime to avoid background noise. So at the end of the presentation, we will share a copy of the slides with the participants. So you will likely receive these tomorrow. Recording will also be available. So let's get started. When developing a new product, we first need to understand under which legal framework it falls. Depending on the origin and the nature of the product, how it's manufactured, its properties, how it will be used, what effect it has. A specific ingredient intended for use in animal nutrition could be classified either as a feed additive or a feed material. And it's important to verify whether the substance of interest is permitted for the intended use and whether a registration or a notification is required or not prior to marketing the product. So there may be some ingredients that you're interested in marketing that can be commercialized immediately. For example, a permitted feed material, or it could be that other substances need to undergo an evaluation procedure and obtain an approval before they can be placed on the market. So, for example, a feed additive. So if a registration is needed, then you need to really understand the process and the requirements, and it's essential to be familiar with the current legislation, the guidance, and make sure you know where to start, which data requirements are critical, and also follow the right procedure and avoid any penalties such as those derived from a delay in a study notification. So I'm hoping this webinar will help you understand a little bit better the process of bringing a new feed additive to market, and also in helping you to get the regulatory strategy right from the very start. So the first step is to understand the legal definitions and be sure that your product is placed in the correct legal framework. For instance, feed additives are products used in animal nutrition for purposes of improving the quality of the feed, the quality of the food from animal origin, or to improve the animal's performance. Please remember that feed additives are not intended to cure, prevent, or treat any diseases, and also they are meant for use in healthy animals. There are 5 different feed additive categories: technological, sensory, nutritional, zootechnical, coccidiostats, and histomonostats. Technological feed additives are those that have a technological function in the feed and not in the animal. So For example, preservatives protect feeding stuffs against microorganisms or their metabolites. Antioxidants can prolong the feed storage by protecting against oxidation. Thickeners can increase the viscosity of feeds. Acidity regulators can adjust the pH of feeds, etc. Sensory feed additives can be either colorants that improve the visual characteristics of feeds of food derived from animals or non-food producing animals, for example, pet fish or birds, or flavors that improve the organoleptic properties of the feed. Nutritional feed additives are meant to satisfy the nutritional needs of animals and can be vitamins, provitamins, trace elements, amino acids, urea, or derivatives. Zootechnical feed additives can be gut flora stabilizers, for example, microbial feed additives, digestibility enhancers, for example, enzymatic products, substances favorably affecting the environment. This could be, for example, a feed additive that can reduce methane or ammonia emissions. There's another functional group called other. Here, the applicant can propose a functional group, for example, performance enhancer. And then finally, the physiological condition stabilizer functional group is the most recently created one. And it's applicable to substances that favorably affect the physiological condition of animals in good health, including the resilience to stress factors. And the last group of feed additives are coccidiostats and histomonostats. For the first three categories, technological, sensory, and nutritional feed additive applications, these are not holder specific. This means that once an additive is approved under one of these categories, any company in the EU can sell these additives, provided that they comply with the conditions of the authorization. However, for the other two categories, so technical feed additives and coccidiostats and histomonostats, these are holder specific. So this means that only the applicant will hold the right to sell this product in the EU once it's approved. And then if another company is interested in selling an approved holder-specific additive, then they will need to either submit a separate application or reach a commercial agreement with the original applicant. In all cases, for products belonging to any category, the approvals are granted for a period of 10 years. And this authorization is renewable by submitting a dossier 1 year prior to the expiry date. So let's now evaluate the registration process of feed additives and also the timelines. So in order to prepare an application for the registration of a feed additive, applicants must follow the feed additive regulations. So Regulation 1831 from 2003 outlines the registration procedure. Regulation 429 from 2008 outlines the data requirements for the preparation of a dossier. And then since March 2021, the requirements from the Transparency Regulation, which is Regulation 2019-1381, are also applicable to all regulated products in the food chain, including feed additives, but of course, including other products like food enzymes or food flavors, GMOs, and any other regulated product in the food chain. Of course, applicants will also need to follow the EFSA guidance when building an application. So this is a process or a system that we can call it one door, one key, which means that once the additive is approved, the approval is applicable for all EU member states. So feed additives are regulated at the EU level and not at a member state level. So we will see that the process involves the applicant preparing a dossier with administrative and technical information and then submitting this application to the authorities. Once the application is submitted, the European Union Reference Laboratory will be in charge of, the European Union Reference Laboratory will be in charge of evaluating the information related to the analytical methods, and the European Commission and member states will decide on whether a feed additive is approved or not, based on the evaluation that is performed by EFSA and by the EURL. So we will go through these steps in a little bit more detail as well during this presentation. So as I mentioned earlier, in order to prepare an application for the registration of a feed additive, applicants must follow the regulations as well as the EFSA guidance documents. So there are two different sets of administrative guidance documents you can find on EFSA's website. One for applications submitted prior to March 2021, and then a different set of administrative guidance documents for those that are submitted after March 2021, when the transparency regulation entered into force. So some of the changes derived from the entry into force of the transparency regulation are the requirement to notify studies, the possibility of requesting pre-submission advice, or the need to prepare a confidential and a non-confidential version of an application. You can see on the right of the screen a list of the technical guidance documents. So in this case, for the renewals, there are also two different sets of guidance documents. Again, due to the entry into force of the transparency regulation, which has had an impact on the procedure. So, for example, for renewal applications submitted after March 2021, there is a requirement to submit a list of intended studies and undergo a public consultation process prior to the submission of the dossier. There's just one set of the remaining technical guidance documents covering the identity, the characterization, the condition of use of feed additives, the characterization of microorganisms used as additives and production strains. There's also a statement that EFSA has published regarding the whole genome sequence analysis and the criteria for evaluation. And then there are other guidance for the assessment of the safety for the target species, safety for the consumers, safety for the environment, for the users, and finally, there is a guidance on efficacy. So EFSA is currently working on updating the guidance documents, and the ones that are marked in bold in this slide are the ones that are currently under revision, the one on user safety, efficacy, the guidance on microorganisms, and the statement on the WGS. The deadline for the final versions to be ready is June 2024. However, we do expect that EFSA will publish drafts of these new guidance documents during this year or early next year. So the drafts will be subject to public consultation before they are finalized. So also keeping track of the guidance updates is also really critical for planning and for making sure that you're always following the most recent version of the EFSA guidance documents. So here you can see a screenshot of the e-submission food chain platform, which is used for the submission of feed additive applications. And you can see like the technical dossier include three main sections that cover the identity, the safety, and the efficacy of a feed additive. So in the identity section, the applicant must cover data on the characterization and the conditions of use of feed additives. Specifically, in this section, information is included on product specifications and proposed dose, target species, administration, use in feed or in water. Also, batch-to-batch variation data is needed to evaluate the product's homogeneity. Depending on the nature of the substance, the source, the manufacturing process, different purity parameters will also need to be analyzed. Also, depending on the physical state of the product, different parameters will also need to be measured. For example, viscosity for liquid products, or dusting potential, particle size, or potential presence of nanoparticles for dry products. If the additive consists of a microorganism, or if it's produced by a microorganism, then the microorganism will also need to be characterized. The data that is required to characterize a microorganism will really depend on whether the microorganism is a bacteria, a yeast, a fungi, whether it's listed in the qualified presumption of safety list or not, whether it has been genetically modified or not. And data requirements can include, for example, testing of antimicrobial resistance, toxins, virulence factors, or an evaluation of the taxonomy of the microorganism. Data on the manufacturing process also needs to be provided, and also homogeneity and stability can be required depending on the proposed mode of use, and also on the target matrices. If relevant, information may also be needed in section 2 related to interactions, for example, between microbial feed additives and coccidiostats. Also, a safety data sheet needs to be provided for the feed additive. And finally, this section needs to include information on the analytical methods and the validation and verification that applies. So section 3, for section 3, the applicant must provide data on the target animal safety, on consumer safety, user worker safety, and environmental safety. However, depending on the nature and the properties of the substance, the intended use, the category, the functional group, it may be possible to justify that some of the safety data requirements do not apply to a given application. So this is really addressed on a case-by-case basis. Also, in some cases, it may be possible to draw certain safety conclusions based on publications instead of having to run in vitro or in vivo trials. And in relation to section 4 of the dossier, this includes information on the efficacy of the feed additive. So whenever these efficacy studies are required, these can be either in vitro studies. So these are generally required when the additives have an effect on the feed and not on the animal. So, for example, technological feed additives, which can be stabilizers or acidity regulators, preservatives. However, in vivo trials may also be required, generally for additives that have an effect in the animal. So, for example, zootechnical feed additives or coccidiostats. So in most cases, 3 trials are required, representing a range of target matrices for the in vitro trials. And for the in vivo trials, also generally 3 trials are required for each target species. But there are opportunities for extrapolation if an application is meant for more than one target species. For example, extrapolating the results obtained in chickens for fattening to turkeys for fattening, for example. So let's see how the procedure works. And we will break down the process into 4 different steps. The first one being the pre-submission step, which involves EFSA and also the European Union Reference Laboratory. So prior to submitting an application, and as of March 2021, this is derived from the transparency regulation. EFSA allows applicants to request pre-submission advice. So Please bear in mind that the scope of this advice is very limited, and it's generally restricted to the content of regulations and to interpretation of the guidance. So, for example, advice on study design and on acceptability of the trials is excluded from the scope of the the pre-submission advice. If you are working on a renewal dossier, then please bear in mind that submitting a list of intended studies and undergoing the pre-submission advice is a mandatory step. So also considering that applications need to be submitted, renewal applications need to be submitted 1 year prior to the expiry date of that application. We do advise to start planning the submission at least 2 years in advance, just to allow sufficient time for all these new pre-submission activities that didn't apply prior to March 2021. So also since March last year, all studies that are intended for, or that will be used for registration purposes for all dossiers, like renewal dossiers, but also for any dossier, need to be notified in a portal called EFSA Connect before the start of those trials. So this requirement doesn't include literature searches or studies that involve desk work, such as bioinformatic analysis, but all of the remaining studies that involve any analytical work are subject to this notification requirement. So this is really, really important when planning an application or when running studies that you think may be included in a future dossier. Please bear in mind that if studies are not notified adequately prior to the study start, EFSA may apply a penalty during the assessment of the dossier. And this is translated into a 6-month evaluation freeze during the assessment. So it's really important to try to avoid these penalties and to follow the process correctly. So again, like prior to submitting an application, there is also a requirement to undergo an administrative process with the European Union Reference Laboratory. For new applications, a fee of 6,000 euros is due to cover the costs of preparing an evaluation report by the URL, and also for handling samples, which is part of the URL's responsibility. So for new dossiers, samples may be needed prior to submission of the application, and also some paperwork is involved in the process. So it's advisable to start this procedure at least 6 weeks prior to the planned date of submission to make sure that you are able to submit the dossier on time. So once the application is ready, then it must be submitted and the validation process starts. So applicants submit the application through the e-submission toolchain platform, and then the EC checks that the proposed feed additive falls within the scope of the feed additive regulation. This is Regulation 1831 from 2003, and then sends a request for scientific advice to EFSA. Once the request is accepted by EFSA, then it becomes a mandate, and EFSA has a period of 30 working days to perform a completeness check and to validate the application. So during this time, if there are any issues that need addressing or any data that is missing, then EFSA will pause the validation process and contact the applicant to request the missing data. And once the dossier is validated, then the scientific risk assessment starts. A decision on the confidentiality is taken by EFSA, who is then going to publish the non-confidential version of the dossier in a portal called OpenEFSA. EFSA also launches a public consultation on the dossier while performing the risk assessment. And the risk assessment itself takes 6 months. However, this is really important. EFSA can stop the clock, like the evaluation clock of 6 months, at any time if they consider that additional information is needed from the applicants. And then they won't restart the clock, the evaluation clock, until the data requested is submitted. So this can also cause delays during the evaluation process. In parallel to EFSA's evaluation, the European Union Reference Laboratory performs an assessment on the analytical methods, and they publish an evaluation report, which is due generally 3 months after the validation. However, the period can be extended by 1 month if the applications are complex. So once the risk assessment, in which EFSA evaluates all the data on safety, efficacy, identity, is complete, then the panel adopts an opinion, and it's shared with the applicant, and then it's published. So if the opinion is favorable, then the application is discussed at the SCOPAF meeting, the Standing Committee on Plants, Animals, Food and Feed, and an approval annex is proposed. In theory, 3 months after the publication of the opinion. In practice, it can take longer. So the proposed regulation is then voted, and then if the outcome is positive, then it's ratified by the European Parliament and it's published in the official journal. Then the regulations enter into force 20 days after the publication in the official journal. And then finally, as you're probably all familiar with, there is a register of approved feed additives in the EU, which is regularly updated and will include an entry to reflect this approval. So if you are preparing a feed additive dossier registration, please count on at least 2 years from submission to approval. The timelines can, of course, really vary depending on the complexity, the quality, and the completeness of the application submitted. But just to wrap up, our advice is to carefully follow EU guidance and regulations and submit a really good quality, complete and compliant dossier, just to avoid unnecessary delays, unnecessary questions during the evaluation, and even avoid an inconclusive opinion the first time round. So this will ultimately speed the time to market. So I will open the floor to questions in 1 minute. But I first just wanted to let everyone know that if you would like to learn more about feed additives, about case studies, about regulatory strategy, also applicable to veterinary products, USA, EU as well. There will be an opportunity for you to attend a workshop delivered by Argenta at the Kisako event on animal health, nutrition and innovation. It's taking place on the 6th of March in London. If you're interested in registering and attending this event, you can use the discount code that is displayed at the top of the slide, and this will give you a 10% discount. And in the workshop hosted by Argenta, we will have Eleanor McCartney, Klaus Hellman, Pachi Sarasola, who are the founders of Benetech Consulting, Clifovet, and OnDAC Scientific, all of them belonging to the Argenta family. And if you would like to set up a meeting with any of them or with other Argenta colleagues during this event, please send us an email and we will be happy to arrange it. So yes, thank you very much for listening.